tell us, what is it like to have your job? I mean, we know it's a tough job, and you have a lot of constraints, and you also have goals that you want to get done. I mean, so what is it, give us a sense of what it feels like to be working in the regulatory molasses.
Well, I mean, first of all, accent on the positive. It's an extraordinary agency with a very unique and essential mission. We regulate products that account for somewhere between 20 and 25 cents of every dollar that consumers spend on products and things that really matter. Drugs, devices, cosmetics, dietary supplements, the safety of the food supply, the blood supply, important aspects of nutrition. Most recently, we regulate tobacco products, things that emit radiation. I mean, it's a very, very big list of roles and responsibilities, and what we do really matters. And, you know, that's a good motivator. You get up in the morning and you know that you're working for an organization that has a real purpose. And, you know, we are committed to being, you know, a science-based, data-driven regulatory agency with a very clear public health mission. The hard part is that because we are responsible for things that really matter, people really care, and there are a lot of different stakeholders, and there are a lot of different perspectives, and as you just heard, they're very smart, committed people that see the issues very differently, and you know, so we get caught in the crossfire, of course, but what it's like to do the job is really that it's an extraordinary, I think Andy spoke to this, it's an extraordinary group of dedicated professionals who really, through thick and thin, are trying to find the path to do the thing that will most matter to the public.
Now, if I had to summarize that discussion we just had in a sentence, the big question here does seem to be, do you have the data you need to do that? Do we have the right kinds of data? I mean, are we dealing with, whether it's because we're shifted because of shifts in scientific focus or shifts in what we can measure? I mean, are we getting the right data about, let's just focus on new therapeutics and devices now, are we getting the data that we need?
Well, I heard many things in that discussion. That, of course, was one. I think the challenge is that, I mean, first of all, there are no absolutes. I mean, we would all like to believe that with science as our compass, the decisions would always be clear, but, you know, we know that different people can address a scientific question and in good faith come out in different places. So that's that's always an underlying challenge. But I think that it is critical and fundamental to the integrity of our work that we seek to get the best data possible and to use evidence-based decision making. And I think that over time we are learning that for certain kinds of problems, the old ways of doing things aren't absolutely necessary to still get good, robust scientific answers. In other areas, I think we're struggling to figure out what is the best way in a timely way that can help to deliver innovative new products to patients, products where we can't necessarily have all the answers. I mean, Steve Nissen was talking about the study he was doing on obesity. Well, chronic diseases, for example, present critical challenges because you don't want to have to wait for the whole course of the disease to necessarily study a drug and approve it.
It's slow and it's random.
It's slow and it often requires very large numbers, et cetera. So we need to think creatively, and you heard some of that in the panel just before this about new innovative clinical trial design so that we can start to get answers that are meaningful earlier using surrogate endpoints and different kinds of biomarkers and different types of clinical trial designs, and also take advantage of the fact that we actually can study drugs both as part of a pre-market process and also a post-market process, and we're starting to do a lot more with the kind of accelerated approval that was just mentioned.
What can you do in post-market? Because it's much harder to do that randomized controlled trial, which as Don said in the previous panel, is what a lot of medicine's been based on for the past 70 years.
Well, it's much harder, but number one, it's not impossible to get meaningful information in the post-market surveillance, in the post-market setting, not at all. You can do continuing studies that are well controlled and targeted to asking and answering certain questions. You can also do what we're doing now in a very vigorous way, surveillance using existing databases and taking advantage of the push to electronic health records.
This is the Sentinel
the Sentinel database, where we can both recognize emerging safety trends and hone in on them. And we can also actively query the database, which now has about 159 million, almost 160 million patients in the database. We can actually go in and more proactively look for correlations if we've begun to get reports of something that might be a concern as a safety risk associated with the drug that's in the marketplace. But the fact is that no matter how good your study's pre-market, once it goes into the marketplace and many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions more patients are taking the drug, and in a setting that's much less controlled, but reflects the real world of other medical conditions and other exposures and, of course, other medications, things are going to behave somewhat differently. So we have to be realistic that we're not going to know everything about a drug and its safety and efficacy before it goes into the marketplace. So I think we have a real obligation to think in new ways and to really take a life cycle approach.
And you've been able to do that also through outside institutes like the Critical Path and the New Medical Devices Institute.
Yes.
How do those interact? How do those inform your regulatory policy? How quickly can you actually make those changes about how these studies are run?
Well, there, if I understand your question, I think you're talking about the fact that we are increasingly engaged in collaborative research efforts across sectors with industry and with academia, and engaging other stakeholders, including, importantly, patients and consumers. And this is enormously valuable, and I think will be increasingly so. And my biggest worry there is making sure we have the resources to really fully support the kind of pre-competitive collaborative research that can really give us new insights into critical aspects of the disease processes that we're trying to address to help speed medical product development, and importantly, giving us new knowledge and tools, new models and approaches for regulatory review. We see really complex products coming before us to treat very complex diseases. The expertise does not all rest within the FDA, and we would serve no one if we pretended that we really alone could develop some of what's needed to efficiently and effectively review these products. And so we see these research consortiums as really a unique avenue to both strengthen the regulatory tools and approaches that we need to deepen the scientific understanding of human biology and disease mechanisms that will improve medical product development, and help us also really develop the science of safety, which I think has been underdeveloped and is very, very important as we look at the whole package of what matters to getting innovative products that matter to patients.
And I think it's probably a good time to mention that over the past 2 fiscal years, the FDA has approved 35 brand new drugs each year, which is a rate which is much faster than at any other time since I've been covering the industry. But as soon as you're talking about those things, it seems like other stuff comes up. And you've had a big distraction lately with the compounding issue. With compounding pharmacies, where you have what was originally a small business of reformulating drugs for other uses, has become a big business, and as a result of contamination, there's been some real tragedy. Do you think you have the authority right now to regulate compounding pharmacies with the FDA's current authority?
I think that this is a critical moment in light of this recent tragedy with the meningitis outbreak to really have a thoughtful discussion about what is needed. Sadly, this outbreak wasn't the first of its kind. Looking back over the past 2 decades, there have been periodic outbreaks of this kind, and there will be more if we don't make sure that we have the kind of systems in place for appropriate ongoing regulatory oversight. And right now that doesn't exist. We do need new authorities. We need to strengthen and clarify existing authorities. And I think we need to really look at how the healthcare system and the industry has evolved since the time that some of these laws were put in place, to make sure that as we review what's needed in terms of new legislation, we really shape it to what's needed.